there's like, what, like 45 questions, and we have to get through them in 56 minutes, so this will be fun.
Thank you very much for being here, first of all. I'll kick it off with, is this your first time in Turkey? And what actually brings you here to Istanbul this week?
This is indeed my first time in Turkey. So I've actually been here for about 3 weeks now. I came on the 29th. There was a 2-week Zorzalo gathering here called Devconnect down in the south near that area close to the Galata Tower. So that was really interesting, and that went into a bunch of areas like both Ethereum and ZK and things that go a bit beyond it, and brain-computer interfaces and other fun things in that area. Then for this week, I've been at all of the various events that call themselves Devconnect, I suppose. Gave a whole bunch of presentations. 3 yesterday, fortunately, just 1 today. But it's been fun so far.
Perfect. And how do you feel about the significance of gathering the global crypto community in Turkey?
Yeah, and I think Turkey is just obviously one of the places where there's just been a huge amount of grassroots interest in and adoption of crypto for a long time. And I mean, it's obvious from the statistics, it's obvious from just like whenever I would make tweets, I would always see like a huge number of responses in Turkish, and I'd always just click the translate button and be really curious about what kinds of things they have to say. The use case is obvious, right? I mean, I remember the first time I passed through the Istanbul airport back in 2013, and like the rate was 3.5, and now it's 28. And when you're living through that, the value of just having some alternative thing to save money and just becomes incredibly obvious. And also, let's say, a place where a lot of crypto projects that have become internationally known and valuable, or either are Turkish or have a lot of Turkish people that are part of the teams, right? In this case, I mean, there's like the Chainway team, there's the people, the Clave wallet, there's a bunch of others. That was just kind of the examples from account abstraction and privacy that I've been focused on a lot recently. So yeah, and there's a lot of activity here, and I think in general, like in the Ethereum community, we try to intentionally go around the world and go to where all of the different people are. So it's, I mean, this is a place I've definitely looked forward to coming to for a long time, and it's definitely fun for me to finally be here, and I hope all of the members of our community also benefit from the experience a lot.
Absolutely. I know the Turkish community have been looking forward to this for a long, long time, and that they appreciate it. And what are your sort of key takeaways and your highlights of having spent a prolonged period of time here?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed that the interest in crypto is real, right? I walked down through the market in that peninsula down south, and just passed by at least like 5 different like shops that are advertising ETH, BTC, like sometimes like SHIB and whatever else people are interested in buying. And look, there's just clearly a lot of just actual attention and a lot of interest, and just seeing the interest from builders, I think, is also one of those other things that has been really confirmed for me. So I think for a lot of us, that's just been good for building relationships, good for just getting our feet on the ground and just understanding the situation in some more detail. And I look forward to coming back. I look forward to working together more with all of the various teams that we've gotten to know better.
Perfect. And given that Turkey now reportedly has the highest levels of crypto adoption, the estimates range from, I think, 25 to 52% of people owning crypto, how critical do you think Turkey is as a hub for crypto adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, I think what's interesting about Turkey, it kind of mirrors some things that I saw in Argentina, which is that like there is this combination of what is a dysfunctional environment in some ways, but with people who are very talented and who are like both just very sophisticated in like figuring out ways that to do the things that they need to do to like economically survive for themselves and their families, and to like actually build things that go further from there. So it's in environments where I think there's a potential for a really strong developer community to appear, like something that's even much stronger than what we've seen so far. And I think a huge amount of potential for development. Obviously, already a very large amount of usage. Still a way to go in terms of like getting inroads for actually decentralized things and not people just interacting with crypto through like centralized exchange wallets. But that's a challenge everywhere, and that's like fair because the blockchains have definitely not been scalable enough or usable enough, and that's something that the space just needs to improve on.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of the projects that you've interacted with since you arrived here in Turkey, but what type of new projects, I'm curious, have you come across since arriving here that sort of excite you? Or is it perhaps just the projects that you've seen and heard of in the past?
I think Clave is one of the new the ones that I've heard about for the first time here.
Perfect. Yeah. We have a question as well here from the community. It's what is your favorite Turkish dish?
It's a good question. Actually, I mean, I think the tea is up there. Like normally, I always just do green tea everywhere, but here, like I have the local, like the Turkish tea about half the time, and it's it's quite good. It's quite unique. Definitely appreciate like not getting sugar poured into it. It's one of those I try to minimize sugar, and I always appreciate when people are helpful there without asking.
It is indeed a big tea-consuming nation. I think they even grow their own tea, surprisingly. And I know the Turkish community appreciates when people come and appreciate their goods and services as well. So we're going to move on very quickly to some Ethereum-related questions. The Ethereum roadmap was last updated in November last year. Can you give me an update on the Ethereum roadmap, considering its past, present, and future?
Yeah, and I feel like in general, the Ethereum roadmap has been stabilizing quite a bit over the last few years, right? And because historically there have been a lot of things that have changed because of just like changes in circumstances, changes in ideas, realizing that something doesn't work, realizing that something does work, new problems popping up. I think the big changes between last year and this year would be, one is just the realization that like there's something to be done about staking centralization, right? Like the status quo of the different pools and solo staking being hard and all of those things is not really healthy. And there's I think a big opportunity to do some redesigns to the staking system that really alleviates some of those issues and both improve centralization and even try to make the algorithm more efficient. And like, for example, just like have single slot finality, but only have like 10,000 signatures in each slot instead of not having single slot finality and having like 30,000 signatures in each slot, which is what we do today, right? There's a lot of room to try to, like once you make some trade-offs that I think realistically will have to be made anyway to really improve on efficiency and improve on decentralization at the same time. So that's one of the threads that I expect will continue to be worked on. Then data availability and that side of things is like basically probably a bit slower than we expected, but it's still moving forward on the same path as we expected. In general, on scaling, I feel like the pendulum has swung back slightly toward more off-chain data stuff, right? Because of both because the amount of near-term and mid-term demand is so high that like even the data availability that we can do is not going to be able to cover it, and because the level of security that you can get with off-chain stuff, I think, is higher than anticipated. Like, a lot of the plasma ideas that I talked about a couple of days ago are probably a good example of that, right? But otherwise, still moving forward on data availability. I'm still moving forward on Verkle trees, snarking the EVM, all of the EVM improvement efforts, just all of those different things. So definitely, a lot going on the same path. I think nothing new on the functionality side. Maybe, unless you want to include like the whole off-chain data thing, but that's kind of, by definition, off-chain, like outside the layer one. So, it doesn't touch the core devs, yay. But it's, just a sort of responding to threats and like making sure things like security and decentralization get preserved, and just like some fairly small tweaks compared to years in the past. So in general, the roadmap is stabilizing, which I think is a really good sign.
Perfect. And you mentioned that at the beginning of that response, some ideas had changed. Is it important for the community to view the roadmap as something that can be dynamic if new information is introduced into the equation and things can change? Or should they really think of it as guidelines that are more concrete?
And I think there is different tiers of ideas in Ethereum in terms of how much people are attached to them, right? So like at the top there is what people call immutability, right? That like the like hard forks should not just like arbitrarily go in and like take away some people's money and give other people money. And like as we've seen in the DAO situation, like that's something that people highly value, and trying to interfere with that is just like extremely politically costly, and that's something that's going to be true no matter what the changes to technology are. Then there's like a bit at a lower tier, like things like proof of stake, and like switching over from proof of stake, like back to proof of work, for example, would just be like totally politically unviable at this point. But like switching from proof of stake to a better proof of stake, then like there's, I think, a lot of room for discussion there. Probably more than last year, especially now that the whole pool centralization discussion has come into the foreground more. Then you have things like the EVM, and I don't think like community members are really emotionally attached to the EVM. I think there's a desire to make sure that existing applications can keep running, and there's a desire to minimize complexity. And like those two things together basically already add up to like roughly keeping the EVM, and if you add functionality, do it sparingly. But like beyond that, there isn't as strong an attachment. And then you have like specific algorithms that like can totally be changed if people want to. And then once you get into the weeds, it's just all technical features that a lot of people don't really care about, and they're happy to defer to the experts. So I think it's a spectrum between all of those things.
Perfect, thank you. And the Dencun upgrade is expected to be live early 2024. What should we know ahead of time, and what can we expect on that?
So AP 4844 is obviously the big one. And what's interesting, I think, about EIP 4844 is that if you look at the roadmap to full Danksharding, right? Full Danksharding is the one that gives us data space that could go all the way up to like 16 megabytes a slot or even more. Once you have EIP 4844 like out the door. The only hard forks that you need to get to full Danksharding are just a parameter change, right? Just like changing the maximum number of blobs. And maybe at some point we just make that a voting system, and then you don't need any more hard forks to go up. And so the rest of the rollout to full Danksharding is not a change to Ethereum consensus or execution. It's a change to this extremely isolated thing that just says, like, tell me that this block can be downloaded if he wants to. And like at the beginning, that is just done with full downloading. But over time, like that can be done with data availability sampling, and data availability sampling itself can be upgraded over time. And that's like a piece that individual clients can upgrade, like even separately, even out of sync with each other as the network improves. So yeah, it's the sort of thing that like once you do the first step, doing the steps after that is relatively easy in the sense that it's just like a group of people working in the corner, and they don't really have to interact much with the rest of the ecosystem. And yeah, once the first hard fork's out the door, then it's like a smoother ride from there, which I think is really valuable and good. Yeah, I mean, there's things after that, like taking small steps toward getting rid of RLP is something that I'm excited about, just kind of cleaning up all the different Ethereum consensus pieces. Yeah.
Quite a few exciting things to look forward to there. And I have a question for you on rollups. They appear to be too expensive, and they rely on centralized sequences, which introduces a degree of risk. So the question is, how will Ethereum address these risks?
Yeah, so the rollup teams that I've talked to and that I've asked on stage here in Istanbul, they're all very actively moving toward decentralized sequencing. And a lot of the time that just means, like, instead of one node doing the sequencing, have a consensus algorithm, just like take something like Tendermint off the shelf and just have it run a chain and then commit from that chain into the Ethereum chain, and then you have a decentralized sequencer right there. For rollup data costs, there's basically two solutions, right? One is to like become a Plasma or at least a Validium and do off-chain data and try to be as secure as you can with that. And then the other is to wait for 4844 and then to wait for other things after that. And what I notice is that most of the rollup teams that I follow are taking both approaches at the same time, right? Like, I think that this is true of Optimism and Arbitrum and Polygon. Like they all have a rollup offering and they have a Validium offering, right? And if you want the higher security, you go do the rollup. If you want the higher scalability, you go do the Validium. So I think that's something really interesting. And it is definitely the right choice. I think just because different applications have different needs in the short term. And then in the longer term, like either it just becomes clear what the split between the two is, or one of them improves to the point where the other becomes completely unnecessary. And so we'll see how that goes.
Perfect, thank you. And also a related question, when it comes to scaling rollups themselves, what do you think the main bottleneck is there?
In the short term, it's definitely data. Just having more data space that is guaranteed to be available. There are other bottlenecks as well. So one of them is just optimizing ZK provers so that they can make proofs as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's like how much they can process in a single thread. Like, I know 2 or 3 years ago that was actually the biggest deal for Optimism. Like they could not handle more than like 20 or 30 TPS within their own chain. And I think as activity in these rollups improves, like those kinds of issues are going to come back. And so they might need to do parallelization internally. They might need to do other things, which is going to be interesting to see. Yeah, I think like those are the three.
Okay, and moving on to user experience for a brief moment. It's another one of those barriers to entry rather for newcomers who find the UI complicated or unfamiliar or sometimes difficult to navigate. So how are you working on addressing this?
Yeah, I think there's different ways to think about the user experience problem. Like the one that I think about the most is like what I call the user experience of security, right? Like it's not user experience versus security. It's improving the user experience of being secure enough that you know that your APR next year is not going to be negative 100%. So that's like this is a big part of why I've been focusing so much on account abstraction, and there are wallet companies that are doing really fascinating stuff now with AA. Like there are wallet companies that are using like trusted hardware modules that already exist in people's phones to store keys, and basically having like relying on that more limited and more secure core. So your coins still have a layer of security even if the rest of your phone's operating system gets hacked. There are things like ZK email that try to use even email addresses or other sort of more conventional things that people outside of crypto already have as guardians for their wallets to recover if they lose their keys. There are just ongoing efforts to try to make the UI for things like choosing guardians easier. And then on the application level side, and this is another whole big security rabbit hole, is if someone sends you a link hey, here's an airdrop, and you go to the link and then it tells you to sign something in MetaMask, and then if you're about to click it, how do you even know is that a real airdrop or are you about to click something that's going to steal all your money, right? And for most users this is super hard, and I think there's a big frontier of possibilities for wallets there to try to really improve and to do a much better job of helping users better understand what it is that they're about to sign. And that does require wallets to really become much more opinionated and not just kind of show the hex and be a static thing that where they just by giving people a bunch of 0 to 9s and A to Fs, so they think that they're finished doing their duty. It's something that will require the wallet to have a dedicated team and probably push out updates every month. But really trying to improve on that side of security, I think, is something that just is super important, and wallets are going to have to do more of.
Mm-hmm. And while we're on the topic of security, Ethereum.org states that security upgrades on the roadmap are in the advanced stages of research. So what improvements can we expect?
I think, if we're talking about the Ethereum L1, then the main security upgrade is just the proof of stake and hardening the proof of stake, improving its decentralization. If we're talking about L2s, then the biggest security upgrade is going to be just making sure the ZK EVMs are hardened enough that there aren't serious bugs in the code. If we're talking on the user side, then I think there's two ends. There's the keeping your coins safe within the wallet, and then there is keeping your coins safe while you're interacting with applications. And those aren't really protocol changes. Those are just going to have to be wallets that just actively responds to all kinds of threats.
Okay. Yeah. And a majority of Ethereum nodes currently run through centralized providers like Amazon Web Services, which leaves the system exposed to a centralized failure. So how do you see this being addressed going forward?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this, right? One part is that we need to improve the software so that running through centralized providers just becomes less necessary in general, right? So ideally, something like the Portal network would just be active and would be running and really effective. And so we would have a decentralized peer-to-peer network that if you wanted to go ask for specific pieces of the state or history, you would go there into the Portal network and it would give you back a reply with proofs, and you'd be able to verify the proofs, and you would not have to verify and rely on centralized nodes at all. The best that we have now is Helios, which is a light client done by the A16Z team that basically uses ZK Snark over the sync committee, and that just allows people to have a really basic guarantee that they're following the correct chain, at least assuming the majority of the validators are honest. And if the So that is pretty limited in its functionality, right? Because that just tells you have the right block headers, and like users need a lot more than block headers, but it is a start, right? And if we just at least have like better hardening, like if we have a better ability for users to verify Merkle branches locally and have light clients that run locally, then what you can have is you can have more but lower quality servers, and then you can do a one of n between them, right? Like you don't need to just talk to Infura, you can talk to like 5 different servers, and they could even be based in like 5 different countries that don't like each other if you care about minimizing even your political risk. And then you just like get your data from all of them, and then like locally you verify the branches, and if any one of them tries to trick you, then like they're going to give you a bad branch, and like you're not going to be able, and like the verification on your side is going to fail, right? So like going to one of n, I think, is also something that can be done. And then maybe we can eventually have a sort of utopian, perfect peer-to-peer network where we don't need to have kind of servers where you explicitly have to type in their IP addresses at all. And that would be super basic, but I think it's going to take a bit longer to get to that. But I think realistically we can. We just have to work towards it. Yeah, and there's obviously the equivalent of that for just being able to push transactions. There's more sophisticated stuff too. Like I know a lot of dApps recently have been using things like the graph because they just need like specific claims about history that are too difficult for a regular node to get. And then like that also has its own decentralization challenges inside of it as well. So yeah, I think the answer just like is continuing to improve on technology and getting to the point where like you actually have that kind of verification.
Thank you. And on client diversity, it's important for a more resilient network. So can you explain why client centralization poses a risk and how Ethereum will address these challenges, particularly based on the execution client? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's 2 kinds of risks in client centralization. So there is the like software bug risk. Like basically if you have one client and there's something wrong with that one client, then like you're going to have a wrong chain, and that wrong chain is going to keep going and it's going to finalize, and look, that's bad. Actually, what a lot of people don't realize is like when you think you have one client, sometimes you actually have 2 clients. And like 2 clients is definitely worse than 5, right? 2 clients is worse than 5 because if you have 2 clients, then any bug, even a bug where like the results are inconsequential, is going to be a 50-50 split, and it's going to cause a really big problem on chain. If you have 5 clients, if one of them fails, then like that's only 20% and it doesn't matter, right? But one client, in theory, is 2 clients in practice because of versioning, right? So this is something that happened in Bitcoin back in 2013. There was a bug in the database of the Bitcoin core client where one version would basically rely on the database to update blocks in a way where the database had a default setting that did not allow it to make more than about 5,000 changes at the same time. And a newer version had a different database that did not have that problem. And so there was at some point a block that made more than 5,000 changes, and it like basically triggered this split, and some clients rejected the block and other clients accepted it, right? And like that created a really big split on the network, and it caused like over a dozen blocks, like I think 4 hours of history to revert. So it got pretty bad. But if you have a diversity of clients, then like one of those having that kind of internal problem is going to be much less of an issue, right? So that's a technical issue. The political issue is basically like preventing one single client dev team from having too much power to set the agenda, and from entering into this situation where that one client team is like the only team that is competent enough to really continue moving things forward and propose ideas. And so if the community wants to move away from them, like they don't realistically have any other alternative to switch to, just because like no one else has been kind of actively exercising the muscles of like maintaining a client and is in a position where they can just step in and get the network to start relying on them. And so when like if you only have one team that's in that position, then like they might be able to like have a lot of leverage to push a lot of changes, right? And like in the future, that might even involve things like saying like, oh, you know, Ethereum ecosystem is running out of money, and like we are the development team, and like we need 2 million ETH, and like here's a hard fork, and like guess what? That hard fork also has a bunch of BLS precompiles that everyone wants. So are you going to take it, right? And like that's. Yeah, like that's the kind of risk that could happen. And there's like milder versions, right? Like even just whether or not to add different BLS precompiles, like there's a lot of trade-offs just in terms of values there. Yeah, then on the pure technical level, I think the best example of this within Ethereum is the Shanghai DOS attacks back in 2016, when there were a bunch of attacks on the Ethereum network that were basically involving an attacker that discovered how to construct transactions that were extremely slow to process but still consumed a normal amount of gas, basically exploiting all of the different bugs in the Ethereum clients that the attacker could find. And the network became really slow for about a month. It was basically a constant war where the attacker would find a bug and then clients would release a new version, and then 2 days later the attacker would find another bug, and then a new version, and then another bug. During that period of time, the chain was very slow for a month, but it never stopped. Always, there was one client that was able to run at least a little bit, right? Sometimes there was a client that could not process blocks at all, but there was always one client that could run at least a little bit. And I thought that was a great example of the power and like resilience that having multiple clients could get you. So that's why multiple clients are important. In terms of how the Ethereum ecosystem is going to get there, I think one of the answers realistically is just social pressure, right? Like this is how we've successfully gotten from having one client with 80% of the market share on the consensus side down to something that's much more balanced. And it's also how like the percent of censoring relays got pushed down from 80% to about 33% over the last year or so. So there are precedents for just like plain old social pressure actually working, which I think is interesting. And like that's probably the simplest answer. Another aspect of this, I think, is also that switching clients is hard because like an individual client has a big database, you have to sync, syncing from scratch, and then there's like technical difficulty. And once we have Verkle trees, which allow for something that's called a stateless client, where you can verify blocks without already having any data, because basically the individual like accounts that get touched by the block are just added onto the block, and you have proofs that the values are the correct values. That's the thing that Verkle trees let you do really efficiently. Then that basically means that syncing a new client can become almost instant. And that procedure, I think, is going to make at least running a new client from a technical perspective much easier. It'll make switching much easier. It'll even make it easier for people to run multiple clients like at the same time on this, checking the same blocks on the same computer. So that's also, I think, going to open up a lot of possibilities.
Perfect. And at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned Plasma and Validium. So I'd like to go back there very, very quickly, just for a second, because earlier this week you published a blog. And essentially, I'd like you to elaborate why it's important that we rethink the fundamental limitations of Plasma-based scaling solutions.
So Plasma is this interesting category of scaling solutions that got invented in 2017 by a paper from Joseph Poon and myself. I mean, realistically, Joseph Poon did like over 80% of the work in that initial paper. He deserves a lot of credit there. And basically, it's a scaling design where you only need to publish a little bit of information on chain every time you have a block. And then you have this mechanism called an exit game, where if you have a coin inside of Plasma and you want to take it out and turn it into a coin on Ethereum, you have to like provide pieces of the Plasma tree that prove that you have that coin. And then if it turns out you don't actually have that coin, then whoever the real owner is can challenge and provide other pieces of the tree and put them on chain. And if you are in the right, in the sense that like you are the one who actually has the coins, then you will be able to provide the pieces of the tree to the chain that are the evidence that you currently have that coin today. And if you're not, then you would not be able to do that, right? And there's a lot of cleverness in constructing these rules correctly, but once you do that, then you basically create a system where you have a huge amount of activity happening off-chain, data off-chain, computation off-chain, but what you are trading claims that the two assets that can then later be withdrawn on the underlying layer one whenever you want to, right? And so you can really get a lot of scalability benefits that way. So Plasma paper in 2017. In 2018, there was a lot of effort going into trying to put Plasma into practice. And there were efforts like minimum viable Plasma, Plasma cash flow, Plasma prime, a whole bunch of these really fascinating Plasma distributions. And basically they were trying to take that core idea and like turn it into something that's viable for specific use cases. One of the challenges of Plasma is how it is inherently more application specific than something like the EVM, because in the EVM it's like a state machine. It's just like there is a function that tells you what the current what the current numbers in the database are, and you just run the function. And if someone else ran the function wrong, then you can tell them where they ran it. Like you can tell the chain where they ran it wrong, and that's called a fraud proof. And then you can go and run it correctly again, right? Or if it's a ZK snark, you just like go and prove that you ran the computation correctly. And you don't have to think about what those computations are, right? In a Plasma system, that's not how it works. In a Plasma system, the security of the Plasma system depends on the idea that you have objects that have owners, and the owner of an object has the responsibility of taking that object out if they notice that something is wrong. So that's a different security model, and it requires the applications to be designed in such a way that they're aware of who the owner of particular things is at any time. And so it does require more work, and it's also actually at the beginning like not really even possible to generalize to something like the EVM, just because the EVM just like breaks a lot of assumptions that simple payment systems have, right? Like in a UTXO payment system, right, where basically a UTXO unspent transaction output, like it's like a virtual coin where if you pay me money, then I get a new coin, and then if I pay you money, I have to like break up one of my coins into two coins that are smaller, and then I get back one of the coins, and then you get a totally new coin that contains just the money you need. Like the nice thing about that UTXO approach is when you receive a payment, you get a totally new thing. None of your existing things can be changed without your consent. A balance-based system, right, where you just like track how much money everyone has, does not have that property, because in a balance-based system, you can change my balance without my consent by increasing it, right? And so, like it feels like a really sort of obvious detail, right? Like, yes, of course, you could send me money without my consent, but like we don't care because sending me money is good. But well, for me, for a Plasma system, it's like that creates problems because suddenly it means that like the thing that I have to exit if I want to move my coins over to layer one is something that might be changed without even my knowledge, and I might not have access to it. And like what happens if I don't, and like you have to really look through those complicated cases, right? What ZK snarks do is they massively simplify how these Plasma exit games can work because they completely remove the possibility of invalid blocks. The only case that you have to worry about once you have everything BZK snarked is like, I try to withdraw a thing, but then at some point in the future, someone else has the same thing because actually I already sent it to someone else after I exit, right? And this is interesting because, I mean, first of all, it means that if you withdraw based on the latest information, then your exit can be instant, right? You don't have to wait for other people to challenge, because if you withdraw from the latest thing, then like obviously there isn't any newer thing that can like come in and say like, oh, actually no, like he sent the money somewhere else by now. Then all of these like complexities around how to apply it to the EVM, they don't entirely go away, but a lot of them become much simpler. And so something approaching an EVM Plasma actually becomes viable, which I think is super interesting. So yeah, and I think like just like that fact, right? The fact that ZK snarks make everything so much easier to prove, and like they allow you to make things be so much simpler, like really reopens the design space and really creates a lot of this new ground for experimentation to be possible.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. Certainly a lot clearer for me now. I have a very short question on layer 2s for you. What are your thoughts, and again briefly, on the growing fragmentation across layer 2s?
I think this is one of those challenging questions because part of the vision of layer 2s has always been to try to enable independent experimentation. And like, for example, if you really like the Solana VM and you know, you want to be in Ethereum lands, well, like great, like make a Solana rollup, right? If you know, you really need parallelization and you don't care about having an EVM, then like great, use Fuel. And like Fuel has been like fully trustless for years now. You know, you want to try do things with WASM, like great, we have Arbitrum Stylus, and you can go write a contract with WASM and interact with other people who have contracts written in the EVM. And like, there's a lot of value from that. But at the same time, there is a need for standardization and a need for basic interoperability. For wallets to be possible, for account abstraction wallets to be possible, for just like address standards to work, for it to be clear which tokens are the real ones, for like which USDC is the real USDC. If you send me USDC on a layer 2 I've never even heard of before, like how do I even know that is USDC and you're not trying to fake me? So that's yeah, like actually solving those problems is like really challenging, but I think there is also a need for some kind of standardization. And the thing that we have to standardize, I think, is going to have to be more expansive and like stricter than just saying like everyone has to support private and public keys. But it should be also something that is looser than you know, like, hey, everyone has to have an EVM, right? And like there is some middle ground that captures the things that we want to standardize and leaves open room for innovation on everything else on top. And I hope that we can have the layer 2s come together and really decide like what that set of standards is going to be.
Yeah, and for a non-technical audience, how would you explain the reasoning behind the pivot from sharding on the roadmap to Danksharding?
Yeah, so sharding on the in the original vision basically said that you would have the layer 1 protocol would handle scalability of data and scalability of execution, right? It would handle scalability of everything. The Rollup plus Danksharding approach basically says the L1 still handles scalability of data, and scalability of data is just a much easier piece to handle than scalability of execution. And then layer 2s can handle scalability of execution. And by doing so, we take a lot of load off of core developers. So core developers would no longer have to worry about doing all of this execution scaling stuff at the same time as they're already insanely busy working on the merge and improving the efficiency of Geth and doing all of those things. And like those two different strands could happen in parallel, right? So I think it was just a pragmatic choice to get something out to users in time. Like if that did not happen, then chances are like even right now there would be no scaling options at all, and like we'd still have to wait 1 or 2 years for like some kind of basic EVM sharding to appear, and that kind of basic EVM sharding would probably have a lower level of security, right? So yeah, avoiding that is something that we I think really cared about doing, and it's obviously also brought a lot more innovation to the space, like a lot of independent teams that would have totally not formed if it had just been an Ethereum Foundation hiring spree. Like it has created this really amazing ecosystem. So there's like, I think from a technical perspective in terms of what properties it gives users, like whether something is done by layer 1 or by a layer 2, for execution, it actually doesn't matter much, right? It's like actually pretty much the same security properties in a lot of ways. The difference is like basically standardization versus customization, right? And like layer 2s are definitely more on the customization side than like the strong layer 1 approach. And so that's a balance where I think the ecosystem can constantly keep adjusting. And I think there is desire to move a little bit back on the standardization side. And I think there is a lot of willingness between the layer 2 teams to really try to do that. But like that's an ongoing discussion, and it'll keep happening over the next like few years and decades.
And we'll be following it for the coming weeks and months and years as well. So for a second, looking forward into the not so distant future, what excites you the most about the future of Ethereum?
I mean, I'm just excited by the fact that there finally is a light at the end of the tunnel on like all of the hard things that I've really worried about for a long time. Like the merge happened. We're like out of proof of work. The scalability solutions are happening. We have ZK EVMs that work and that are running, and that are not quite yet stage 2, but Arbitrum is at stage 1. Then like Alex from ZK Sync announced that he's hoping to get to stage 2 within, I think, like optimistically a few months or like something like that. So light at the end of the tunnel on that, and then light at the end of the tunnel on Danksharding. And I think the fact that we have both Danksharding and the Plasma route are, I think, a big load off my shoulders as well, because only one of those need to succeed for Ethereum to be scalable enough for its users. Privacy, a big, I think, turn of the corner on that. We have like at least 5 different privacy solutions. Some with proof of privacy pools, a lot of interesting kind of ideas to like, have enough regulatory compliance that like the outputs of those privacy systems are going to like be actually accepted and not blacklisted by everyone. Then, but at the same time, like not having like government backdoors that can see everything. So yeah, I mean that was a difficult balance, but I think it's interesting that like with ZK Snarks, he can actually achieve it. We have, on the wallet security and account abstraction side, like account abstraction finally is a thing, and it has enough momentum that it's moving forward on its own by now. Then on the application side, the fact that decentralized social is finally taking off is amazing. The fact that we have like Farcaster and Lens, also things like ZooPass to try to do ZK identity. The sign in with Ethereum is kind of expanding. Yeah, like it really is turning into something that's like a much stronger ecosystem that was available even 1 or 2 years ago. So I think that's really amazing too.
Thank you. And 2 weeks ago, we had a chat with Anatoly, and he said, and this is a quote, the difference between a Solana conference and an Ethereum conference is that at a Solana conference, there's way less talk about scaling. So when do you think we'll see a shift from the current sort of infrastructure focus to use case specific applications being maybe the dominant talking point?
Yeah, I mean, what do I think about this? I think the challenging thing about use cases is that like talking more about use cases doesn't mean like that necessarily mean that you get working use cases, right? Like I remember how like back in 2020 and 2021, like we had all of this excitement about like the games and like Axel Infinity and like all of these NFT projects, and there's a lot of that stuff ended up not really panning out at all, right? And like we saw basically that like people were trying to basically use the casino as a substitute for making a game that's fun. And like that's something that where you can convince yourself into believing that it works in a bull market. But then once the bear market starts, the casino stops automatically giving everyone money. It starts losing everyone money. And then if the fun isn't there, then like pretty much everyone is going to get bored and leave, right? And so it's the sort of thing where like on the application side, yeah, it's really important to both like take things slowly and to recognize that sometimes a lot of the valuable applications are going to be kind of the boring ones, and even that like there's a lot of like fundamentals and research questions that we have to think about when you think about applications, right? So like, for example, there's a lot of discussion around like what is the right kind of DAO governance, and the right kind, like that is an application level question, but it's also a deeply technical question. And you know, if you get it wrong, then you're going to make DAOs that break. If a lot of the discussion around ZK, like actually, you know, ZK voting is a really powerful DAO governance tool. A lot of the discussion around you know, like advanced cryptography, like that stuff is incredibly useful for applications. ZooPass, like that's a very application level thing, right? Decentralized social, you know, very application level thing. So I think it's happening, but I think it's the sort of thing that like you also can't rush, and you need to have the fundamentals be there in a really strong and really reliable way for the push on applications to really make a lot of sense. Yeah, like those two things, I think you know, can only really co-evolve with each other, right? And like I think it's really good that we're having all of these deep discussions about like not just how to scale in the sense of increasing TPS, but like increasing TPS in the right way. And on the application side, like it's actually a lot of the same stuff, right? Like it's like the thing that I hate the most is like applications that pretends to be you know, crypto applications, but then like the only way to sign in is a Google account, and you know, if like the whole thing depends on like one centralized server, and there's no way to interact with it at all outside of the one server, and like it basically is just a completely centralized thing that just happens to like have a couple of tokens on Arbitrum or whatever somewhere, or that just like happens to stick a root on Ethereum once in a while, right? So yeah, I think like discussion about applications, it's also important for that to really be principled and to sort of remember you know, like what it is that we're actually all here for. So I'm a big fan of having much more high quality discourse on both of those things, and like I think you can't have a healthy ecosystem without that.
Perfect. And I have a question about the messaging of Ethereum. So is it programmable money? Is it ultrasound money? Is it a world computer, a general purpose blockchain, or all of the above? Because it seems from a newcomer's perspective, it can be a bit difficult to grasp and sometimes make sense of compared to Bitcoin's sort of digital gold statement. So Ethereum's positioning can seem convoluted, essentially. How do you think the messaging of Ethereum overall can be improved?
I think one of the differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum here is like Ethereum does inherently embrace pluralism in a lot of ways. Like there is no dominant narrative to the same extent, right? So like in Bitcoin, for example, if you ask like what is the narrative for how Bitcoin scales, people are going to tell you it's the Lightning Network, right? And the Lightning Network doesn't really have significant competitors in that sense. Like you might have different flavors of Lightning, but it's the Lightning Network. And then if you think about like how Ethereum is going to scale, there is the optimistic rollup camp, there is the ZK rollup camp, there is off-chain data and validiums and plasmas. There's really crazy stuff like IntMax that like almost no one knows about, which is like this weird thing that combines like 4 or 5 bytes of data on chain per transaction rollup style together with a plasma system, and you get something that's like has extremely strong privacy properties, which is you know, really cool. So there are like 5 different ways to do something for any single thing that needs to be done, and like that's valuable, and I think there's a lot of like actually good experimentation that comes out of that. And then like there's lots of people that have different philosophies about like what we're here for, right? Like I think Bitcoin is, because it's inherently application specific, to really be a Bitcoiner you have to really believe that like either, you know, like censorship resistant sound money specifically is something that's like incredibly important and good for the world. But if you're in Ethereum, you can believe that, or you can believe in stablecoins, or you can believe the whole money thing is stupid and we're just trying to make better DAOs, Or you can believe the whole money thing is stupid and DAOs don't work, but we're trying to do decentralized, like social media or carbon credits or art NFTs or whatever else. You can believe that like we're trying to make better mechanisms for fundraising and like think about like quadratic funding and other kinds of public goods funding and things like that, right? Like there's a much larger space of things you can believe and be in it, that is important to do in the world and still be an Ethereum person. And Ethereum as a platform accommodates that. And I think Ethereum as an ecosystem accommodates that too. And when you have that, then like it's, you're inevitably going to just have internal conflict about narrative to some extent, because like each of those sides, like has its own different view on like what even is the sort of overarching narrative that combines all of the threads together. And I think that's fine. I think it is something that is going to stabilize over time, especially as the technical role of Ethereum, the blockchain, versus Ethereum, the ecosystem change over time, right? So like, for example, if it becomes clearer that, let's say Ethereum is a data and settlement layer, and layer 2s are the thing that where like application level stuff happens. Like that's one direction. Versus if like in 5 years Ethereum ends up evolving to the point where like it does 80% of the work and rollups do 20% of the work, then like Ethereum does become something closer to a sort of world computer like operating kernel, and at some point, it's probably going to migrate to being one or the other, which I think is totally fine. But yeah, I think in general, I still I do think that it's still too early to demand one narrative for those things. I think like the correct answer at this point just is that there's space for a lot of them at the same time, and that's part of what makes it interesting.
Final question, I'd like to get your thoughts on DeFi, as our audience would love your thoughts on that. What are your current thoughts on the DeFi space generally, and within DeFi, what sort of innovations would you like to see? Yeah,
I mean, I think my view on DeFi in general is like the same that it's been for a while, which is like I don't care so much about whether people are getting 4% APR or 6% APR. I want people to not get minus 100% APR, and so I like want to see just like simple and dumb and robust stuff that just like serves some pretty basic needs and doesn't try to go too crazy. So like what things do we need, right? Like you need a stable coin, and like I actually think there's an opening for stable coins, especially in the current financial environments where interest rates are pretty high. Because like there's a lot of different like centralized services that are just kind of constraints to only being able to offer 0, and there's like it's possible for decentralized things to kind of potentially go higher than that. And there's value in trying to give people access to other kinds of like real world assets or indices, right? So could be stock indices, could be real estate. I mean, it could also be precious metals, I suppose. But like, I mean, for me personally, I think like stocks and real estate are the really interesting ones. And on the real estate side, including things like fractional ownership. Yeah, I mean, I think like in general, the way that our modern like society interacts with real estate is like pretty pathological, right? Because like it's like either you own a house and you're like insanely over leveraged on one asset, or you do not own a house, and in that case, like you have to pay rent, and so you're implicitly shorting the community that you're living in, and like both of those seem unhealthy, right? And so yeah, like if we can make fractional ownership be like a middle ground that gets actually adopted, I think it could be super cool. But like that's all like pretty simple stuff in a limited number of things, and just like making sure like work on like making the oracles as robust as possible, and make the like systems for doing like liquidations and all of those things just kind of be as like standard and as robust and as unlikely to break as possible. Just focusing on user and wallet security and all of those things, and just get to the point where like you have some number of components that just do the thing that people expect of them and work, and create at least just globally accessible like access to basic functions that people really need. And that's that probably just is what already a really good and honorable thing for DeFi to be doing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We are a little bit over time, and that's all we have time for today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your responses.
Oh, thank you. Wait, if you're the DeFi ant, why do you have frogs?
Good point. I'll share that with our designer.